Factories in China don't even need light to function anymore. Robots work in the dark, 24/7, spitting out electric cars like a vending machine spitting out snacks. Meanwhile, in India, half the time factories can't even keep the lights on because of power cuts. One country runs factories without lights because they're so advanced. The other struggles because electricity just isn't reliable. That's the so-called competition we're talking about when Indians claim they're about to overtake China. Honestly, it's delusional. Let me explain. China today runs what are called dark factories. The concept is simple. You don't need people, so you don't need light. Robots handle almost everything from welding to painting to assembling electric vehicles. The machines don't get tired, don't unionize, and don't need chai breaks every 30 minutes. It's hyper-automation on a scale the world has never seen. Factories like Zeekr, a luxury EV maker in China, can pump out up to 300,000 cars a year. That's more than 800 every single day. Compare that to Tesla, which took over a decade to reach the same output. China is essentially playing EV manufacturing in easy mode. Now flip the camera to India. India launched its own catchy slogan back in 2014, Make in India. It was supposed to turn India into a manufacturing superpower, the next global factory floor. What happened instead? Well, the reality is that India produces around 3% of global manufacturing output. China? Over 30%. So for every widget, car, or phone India makes, China makes 10. India promised a manufacturing revolution, but what it delivered was more like a talent show audition gone wrong. Lots of hype, very little execution. And here's the irony. China had cheap labor for decades, which gave it the title of world's factory. But when wages started rising, instead of crying about it, Chinese companies turned to automation. They invested in robotics, AI, and advanced supply chains. By 2023, half of all industrial robots installed in the world were in China. Half. That's not catching up to the future. That's owning it. That's shaping it with your very hands. Meanwhile, India still argues over how many toilets they can build, and whether cows should be allowed in streets or not. Think about the scale. China dominates industries from electric vehicles to solar panels, rare earth processing to smartphones. If it's in your pocket, on your desk, or running your home, chances are it came from China. India, on the other hand, celebrates assembling iPhones with parts imported from China, like it's a moon landing. And that's ignoring the many mistakes in their production, such as 50% of phone cases having some sort of fault. Many Indians claim they're now challenging China in EVs, but the truth is, Indian EV output is barely a footnote. When China sneezes, the EV market moves. When India coughs, nobody notices, but everybody definitely moves away. Let's talk about the real-world consequences. Because of automation and massive manufacturing capacity, Chinese people today live a completely different life than their parents did. Cities that were once poor fishing towns are now hubs of wealth and innovation. The average Chinese person has seen incomes grow, access to modern infrastructure, and a rising standard of living. They're not worried about whether the power stays on in their neighborhood. In India, a huge chunk of the population still lives in multi-dimensional poverty. That's not just low income. It's no clean water, no sanitation, poor housing, and lack of education. Over 200 million people live in slum-like conditions. Entire families squeeze into tin shacks while their leaders promise that India is a superpower. It's like putting a Bollywood poster over a crumbling wall and pretending the building isn't collapsing behind it. And let's not forget Made in China 2025. This was Beijing's grand plan launched in 2015 to transform the country from low-end manufacturing to high-tech dominance. And guess what? It worked. Robotics, AI, advanced vehicles, green energy, all now made in China. India's version, Make in India, was launched a year earlier by the great chessman Narendra Modi. It was supposed to attract global manufacturers. Instead, investors often find themselves stuck in endless red tape, poor logistics, insane levels of corruption, and strikes. The results? Disappointing, to put it mildly. Make in India became more of a marketing slogan than a real policy. It should have been renamed to Wait in India. Meanwhile, Chinese firms are eating global industries alive. Take electric vehicles again. In 2023, Chinese automakers produced more EVs than the rest of the world combined. Just let that sink in. While Ford and GM in the US are scaling back their EV goals because batteries are too expensive and charging stations too slow to build, China is flooding its streets with electric cars, many cheaper and better than Western competitors. China is flooding its streets with electric cars, many cheaper and better than Western competitors. And India? The government there sets ambitious targets for EVs. But the reality is that most Indians can't afford them and the charging network barely exists. Why buy an EV when you can ride a dangerous tuk-tuk or a cow? It's not just cars either. China controls around 60% of global rare earth processing, the critical minerals that go into everything from smartphones to fighter jets. India, despite sitting on some deposits, can't seem to process or refine at scale. Once again, China owns the value chain while India sits on the sidelines. Indians talk about becoming a tech hub, but when it comes to the hard industries, steel, electronics, chemicals, green energy, China already runs the show. But when it comes to the hard industries, steel, electronics, chemicals, green energy, China already runs the show. The economic results are obvious. China is now the world's second largest economy, closing in on the US fast, while India sits at a distant fourth if we believe the inflated cow dung numbers. Yes, India has a big GDP on paper because of its massive population, but divide it per person and it's embarrassing. The average Chinese person earns 5 to 6 times more than the average Indian. And that gap isn't closing. In fact, with China's dominance in advanced industries, it's only widening. And if we go back to quality of life, walk through a Chinese city like Shenzhen, and you'll see skyscrapers, high-speed trains, cutting-edge tech, and clean neighborhoods that look like the future. And you'll see skyscrapers, high-speed trains, cutting-edge tech, and clean neighborhoods that look like the future. Walk through an Indian city, and yes, you'll see some average-looking office parks, but right next to them, you'll find slums, open sewage, and crumbling roads. China has built entire high-speed rail networks, while India still struggles to build basic highways without corruption scandals. They still rely heavily on the old British system for crying out loud. One country turned its economic growth into real improvements for ordinary people. The other still has half its population living on less than $5 a day. Yet Indian politicians talk about being the next superpower. It's the kind of delusion only possible if you never step outside your own echo chamber. And don't forget global politics. The US and Europe complain about China flooding their markets with cheap EVs and solar panels. Why? Because China produces so much so fast and so efficiently that Western companies can't compete. No one's complaining about India flooding the world with anything except for loud immigrants who lack civic sense. India is too busy trying to survive than to think about global dominance. So when Indians online claim they're about to overtake China, it's worth laughing. China produces about a third of the world's goods. India produces 3%. That's the reality. China's factories don't need light. India's factories can't keep the lights on. China's workers are climbing into the middle class. India's workers are climbing into a pit of despair. China has a plan, executed over decades. India has slogans. The comparison isn't even close. One is a global manufacturing powerhouse. The other is still figuring out how to get out of its own way. If you enjoyed this breakdown, hit that subscribe button. More videos coming your way that cut through the hype and show you what's really happening in the world.